Hey everybody, we're back. We did not get canceled. Here we are.
That's right. Hey everybody.
This is Teacher Talks to Go, and I'm Greg.
And I'm Jessica.
And
glad to be with you again.
And we are here today, and we're excited to resume our programming with the super important topic today of parent phone calls.
That's right. And you might be thinking, well, it's April, so why in the world are we calling parents? But it's a good time to revisit, and actually kind of a crucial time too, because it's the end of the school year. We don't want any surprises. My principal used to say students experience spring sensations, so sometimes the behaviors get a little bit ramped up in the spring. So we're excited to talk about it today.
Yes, and I will say, when I first started teaching, that was something that freaked me out a little bit. I did not like it. And I grew up with the generation where we talked on the phone.
Right.
And so, because I started teaching way back in 2001. And unfortunately for me, the very first parent phone call that I ever made was a bad experience. And so...
I'm just sitting here, I don't remember mine.
I can remember.
Bad.
Yeah, well, you know how when you have emotions, you never forget when there's an emotion attached to something. But so I came out of the gate with a bad experience, but I probably didn't handle the phone call well either, in hindsight. But what happened was I had called a parent. I think they left a message for me to call them about a grade on a mid-semester progress report, and I did not know much about the grades because I had come late in the year and everything, and so I was just relaying information. But she got very irate about the grades on the phone. The parent did, and I always tell teachers when I train them that by and large, the vast majority of parent phone calls that you make are going to be pleasant or at least civil. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, because I believe that most parents want to work together with teachers because they want their child to be successful, and they don't want you to have a bad experience with their child either.
Right.
Because I know from my own kids, I see them as a reflection of me.
Right.
And so,
right.
I do think you're right.
Yes, but in this instance, and I'll wrap up the story about my initial phone call, is that she became very irate, and I was a little reactive, and so she was getting up here about level 9, and I always tell teachers when I train them, and same with students in your classroom. They can be ranting and raving and acting like Yosemite Sam and hopping on one foot, but we've got to stay level 2. So that's also true on the phone. So if a parent starts getting passionate about something, whether it be angry or sad or whatever, the calmer that you remain is a strategy for sure. And I failed that day. So I got into it with her, not a little bit. I was like, well, I don't know what, I got a little defensive, and you can hear it in my tone. I don't know why you think that that's my fault, this, that, and the other. And so it just wasn't a productive conversation. And now I have learned, that I would have done better if I would have remained calm. And then another trick, and we've talked about this on the podcast before too, is your validation strategies that you can use if the parent is upset on the phone or whatever. You want to make sure that they feel like you heard them, and that whatever the concern was, that it was received. And so you might need to ask some clarifying questions, if they're upset.
And stick to the facts too.
Yeah.
Sometimes teachers might say something like, oh, well, Greg is lazy. He doesn't ever turn in work. He doesn't care. And truth be told, we really don't know if they care or not, unless they just blatantly say, I don't care. But you can say, Greg has only turned in 4 out of 10 assignments. I've gone back through just to make for sure I didn't miss anything. I've talked with him about, so just sticking to the facts. On last Wednesday, I sat down with Greg and went over all of his missing assignments.
And leave opinions out of it.
Right. Because they take that as an attack on the character of their children.
Right.
And we just need to
well, I think leaving the opinions out and also leaving the conjectures out. I just assumed that he was apathetic or whatever, or whatnot. But let's back up and let's just kind of walk through a phone call. And I would like to talk about what you say when they answer the phone. So here we are, and we have a little scenario. We need to call home. Let's say there's a child named Brittany, and her grades are slipping a little bit, or maybe she's coming to class late. Let's say it's middle school or whatever. What do you say when you call?
Okay, I normally say, hey there, this is Jessica Moss. I'm Brittany's teacher this year. Is this Miss Huggins? Is this her mother? Or whatever, whatever her name is normally how I start out.
Mm-hmm.
What
So,
about you?
yeah, well, I learned to say, I didn't always say this, but I learned to say, they'd say hello, and I would say, this is Greg Griffin calling from such and such middle school. Could I speak to someone about Brittany? And then, well, this is her brother, and then you can kind of, okay, all right, is there an adult there? Because sometimes they don't live with mom these days.
That is true.
Well, even in those days, it's been a while. They could live with aunt or grandma or whoever. So I think it's pretty safe to say, could I speak to someone about Raymond or whatever the child's name is that you called about, and then you can kind of gauge who you're talking to.
Yeah, and I'll say on that note, I think it's worth saying elementary teachers have far less students. So typically, like, we know who everybody lives with and who's kind of like their character.
That's a good point.
Whereas in middle school, you've got 100 kids, or
right.
I don't even know, maybe
sometimes more.
Yeah, and so there's no way for you to know all that information. So
right.
that might be just
right.
a different.
And also, let's back up even before we call and before we dial. We got to have the right mindset before we pick up the phone. We have to resolve that I'm calling to help this child. This is an effort to help this student be successful. Okay,
Yes.
So you're on a mission. I'm not calling to vent. I'm not calling for retribution. I'm not calling. And those are reasons why teachers call sometimes.
Right.
Or to complain,
or to get them in trouble,
or to get them in trouble, or this. We're trying to troubleshoot. We're trying to fix a problem.
Yes.
So if you approach the phone call that it's about student success, frame everything around student success. But what can we do to help this child be successful? If you have the right mindset before you pick up, that'll be reflected in your tone. Don't you think?
Absolutely. And I have just one thing to add too before we get to the actual phone call. I think it's also important to revisit the positive interaction ratio. So we always, when we're working with teachers, the research says 5 to 1, right? So you want 5 positive interactions with parents versus 1 negative, okay? And that doesn't have to be 5 positive phone calls, but you want 5 positive interactions. So maybe you post like a nice note on Dojo, like, Brittany did such a great job in math today. I just wanted you to know I'm really proud of her. Or she was helpful to a friend at recess who was having a hard time, or maybe it's an email. Maybe it could just be my child's teacher likes to send photos throughout the day of like things that they're doing that they post to everybody. But that's a positive interaction for me. So you want to set yourself up for success and be intentional about providing those positive interactions with parents, so that when you do have to have a negative interaction or one that addresses something that is maybe not positive, that it goes smoother, because they know that you love their child, that you're not always being negative. You want, like you said, for them to be successful.
Right. I think that's a great point, Jessica. It reminds me of that book that we used to study, How Full Is Your Bucket?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Where you got to pour into the bucket and pour into the bucket and pour into the... So there's something that when you take a dip out that you've poured in, you're not just dipping out all the time.
Right. And
so I think that's a great a point to make about that. So with the right mindset, and we call and we want to start out, we want them to be able to hear that our tone is pleasant, non-threatening, encouraging, and then we always teach in our workshops when we talk about parent communication is, if we can find something positive to say about the child before we present the challenge, then that will frame it better, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, so can you give me an example of what we might be able to say about this hypothetical Brittany that we're talking about today, whose grades are slipping and she's coming in late? What might be a positive that you could say hypothetically?
So you might say, Brittany's been doing a great job of participating in class. She's been very engaged. and I noticed that her peers like working with her in groups. And that's really great. But one thing that we're really having trouble with is her turning in her actual work. Like when it comes to the independent portion, she just doesn't do it. Like she likes to talk to her friend, or she'll put her head down. And I know she can do the work because she's participating in the class discussions and she's working with her peers during the group work. I'm just having a hard time figuring out why she's not turning in her work. And you could even say, you know, I've pulled her aside and had like a one-on-one conference with her just to say like, hey, what's going on? And to address the tardies, you could say something like, I've also noticed that she's coming to class late, not every day, but pretty often. Is there something going on at home maybe that I don't know about that I could help with? Or because many times I have seen teachers get mad at students for being absent or tardy. And the majority of the time, that's not the student's fault, right?
Not first thing in the morning, right?
Right, not first thing. Now, if they're just skipping down the hall and going to the bathroom or whatever, that's a different story. But in the morning. Yeah. So, anyway, that's
right. No, that's a great example. And then, I mean, I just think that, you know, like, hey, you know, I used to always say, hey, I really need you to help me with this because I would love to solve this problem. Like, you know, nothing would make me happier than to see Brittany grades go back to where I know they could be. So is there any information you can give me that might be able to help me troubleshoot this?
Yes, that's a perfect way to go about
and so it's like you're not like, oh, now if she don't stop, she's gonna fail this grade if she don't get these grades. And if you slip into that mode, that's gonna be a tougher sell.
Because we're not the parent.
Right.
That's the parent's job to discipline. Well, we do have to discipline at school, but I'm just saying, yes, I think that's a better.
But this student success framework, you know, where you frame everything around, we're problem solving, we're a team, we're all in it together, we're all trying to do what we can to get the child. The child has a responsibility, the teacher has a responsibility, the parent or the guardian has a responsibility. We're all in this together, we have a common goal. If you could just keep, you know, reminding the guardian or the parent, you know, we're in this together, we have a common goal, we both care about your child. That's very hard to disagree with and not get on board with.
Yes.
But you can call and you can make it very non-student success centered and say, I've never seen grades like this in all the years that I've taught. You know,
if she doesn't get together, she's
you know what I'm saying? And it can be very teacher centered if you're not careful. And so when I teach workshops about parent communication, I say, be careful not to make it about you when you call the teacher. Because if you call and say something like, let's say Brittany was disrespectful or disruptive instead of with the grades going down, and you call and say, I'm sorry, I just can't teach when Brittany's in the room because she's so disruptive. It's just really distracting. My lessons don't go, you know, that's about the teacher. And you might think, oh, I would never do that. It is easy to do because I've done it before.
And it's okay to make some little notes. You're on the phone, so you're not in front of you. It's not face to face. So you could make just some little notes about phrases you want to use in lieu of what you were just saying to make for sure you stick to it.
And having a little script or an outline, Jessica, is actually a really good strategy.
Yeah. And you can practice. That's another thing. So with your mentor or your lead mentor or just somebody on your team, you can do practice phone call just to
absolutely
so you feel more confident
in
it. And that maybe when you were talking about the missing assignments, it made me think of something. So of why parent phone calls are so important. So I have the Infinite Campus app on my phone, and it alerts me every single time the grade changes. But not every parent has that, right? Or they might not have their notifications on, or they don't have time to check it, right? So what you want to avoid, let's say Brittany's got all these missing assignments and we're halfway through the 9 weeks. Well, if you don't care enough to call, then what's going to happen is it's going to be the end of the quarter and they're going to get their report card. And now Brittany's mom is through the roof mad.
Right.
At Brittany
that's right.
And
at you. Right.
So if you don't make that effort to reach out, then, you know, that is on you. So,
Right. Yeah, and I have asked some of my teachers that I coached before, like, why haven't you made these calls? And there's like, oh, we're worried that the parent's going to be mad. I said, there's a lot of parents that are going to be very mad if you don't call.
right.
And like my mom was one of those, like, if you didn't let her know that I was doing something wrong,
Mm-hmm.
she would be hot because she wanted to handle it.
Right.
You know, so you got to keep in mind that they have a right to know what's going on. So it is in our job description to make these calls. But real quick, I want to touch on a couple of other things about if the parent gets upset or passionate, I say, angry or upset. Like sometimes you give them some news, and I always say that that they're often operating under a set of false assumptions when you call. Sometimes, especially when it's about grades, because they'll get off the bus and they'll say anything that they can think of to get out of trouble, especially middle school kids. It really elementary, any age, you're going to say anything.
They're gonna lie because they don't want to get
Right.
in trouble.
Well, Jessica, just spill it out. I was trying to be nice. They're going to lie when they go to the bus. They're going to say, oh, Mr. Griffin don't like me, you know, blah, 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 blah. So sometimes parents are a little wound up.
I did turn in that work.
Right. I don't know what he
He
did
must
with
have
it.
lost it.
Right. And so there's this misunderstandings that need to be cleared up. So if the parent gets upset or they cry, I've had parents cry on the phone sometimes or get emotional or whatever. I always just say, hey, why don't you come in?
Yes.
Let's cut to the chase. If the parent phone call is starting to be a little unmanageable or it's not productive, just schedule a conference. You know, so when can you come in? I would love for you to come in. Oh, why do you need me to come in? Is it that bad? If they say that, say, hey, I'd just like to meet with all my parents at least once a year. This would be a good time since we got some things to discuss. When are you available? You'll find, especially somebody who's real angry, when they come in face to face, you'll see a different person.
Right. It's just like when now, you know, through texting and things, there's things that you say through text that you wouldn't say
Right.
out loud. It's
Right.
the same thing in person.
Right.
And on that note too, I do think it would be a good idea if they were really irate on the phone, I would consider having somebody else there.
Absolutely. And yeah, in middle school we team conference anyway, but I think it would be if you anticipated somebody being upset about something, having a guidance counselor, an administrator, another teacher would be prudent for them. But so is there anything else about that? Let's see. So when we leave, when the phone call ends, right, and we're wrapping it up, there should be a plan of action. Right. If we didn't schedule the conference, then we want to end the call knowing what we're each going to agree to do to remedy the situation and to get the student back on the right track.
Yes.
Right. So I think it would be a good thing. Okay, to sum things up today, you know, you're going to start checking their book bag or their folder,
or even their grades on
right.
the campus.
Yeah. And then I'm going to make sure to give you an email on Friday or whatever y'all agree to do. And then we'll revisit this if we need to in the future. Don't you think that's a good idea to walk away?
And I even think one step further is to follow up with an email, because you want some sort of, you don't have to have it, and I know this might be a little bit more work, but just following up with an email. It was so nice to talk to you today. That documents that the phone call happened. I look forward to working together to help Brittany get back on track, just in summary, and do exactly what you just said on the phone, but this is what you're going to do, this is what I'm going to do, this is what Brittany's going to do. Thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you.
Additional documentation, and so we have our action plan, our little action steps or whatever that we're going to do, so it's not just a negative thing or whatever that we just talked about. There's a plan.
And I have two thoughts too to just share about that. Also,
Okay.
is I know you might be listening to this and you're like, well, they must think we just have all this time on our hands. Like, that's going to take forever.
Right.
But the truth of the
Right,
matter
that's
is,
true.
and Greg, maybe I'm wrong because I'm elementary school, but I don't think it's the majority of your kids. I think it's a very small percentage of students that you have to do that with, or, you know, as far as the negative phone calls go. And the second thing about that is, if you actually make the phone calls, the parents are going to, the students are going to know that you're going to do it. And so they're going to do what they need to do more so than if you don't.
Oh yeah.
You know?
And especially in middle school, like if you start, like a lot of times, let's say you have a class, third core is rowdy and they're not on task and whatever, and the whole class is really dysfunctional. If you start calling on a handful of students, your most high flyers, and you start coming up with plans, they're going to start telling each other. He'll call your mama. He'll call your grandma, whoever you live with. He's calling. You know, they'll spread the word.
And they'll know you mean business. I remember in my class, my phone was by the door. Like, it was like when you walk in the door, it was like on the wall. And when I would have like an immediate issue, I would get the child, and I wouldn't do it in front of everybody, but the whole class knew I was calling the parent. And I would take the phone off, we'd go in the hall, I'd close the little door, you know, it still had the little cord, and we'd go out there in the hallway together and call right then and there. And that just shows the other students too, like, she's gonna call them.
Right.
So,
and on the other hand, it will get around that you don't call.
right.
And what happens when it gets around that you don't call? What happens then?
They rule the roost.
You're going to have the new zoo review.
That's right.
And your classroom is
Yeah.
going to be a circus.
Yeah.
And so I think our time is almost up for today, but I would like to maybe in a future episode we can talk about email. Because you just touched a little bit on email today, but I have a lot of other thoughts about email, because I love email communication with parents, but you have to be careful too about how you handle that. So maybe we can talk about that in a future
I
episode.
think that'll be a good one. So.
All right.
Well,
We're going to wrap it up for today. Make those calls.
yes, call those parents. And even, you know, you might be listening to this and maybe you're like, gosh, I really didn't do a good job of that this year, but you're going to make that one of your goals for next year. Like,
Yeah.
that would be a great way to start the year with those positive calls, and then you've got the strategies when you need to make those to address.
Yeah, and it does get easier as you make calls and you make more and more of them. You won't feel anxious or anything. It's just something that you do part of the day, and you want to document your calls too. We didn't touch on that today. You want to keep a phone log or something like that. But anyway,
Yeah.
make
All right,
those
this was
calls.
fun. Yeah.
Happy calling.
Bye, guys.
Bye.